So unfortunately, Dr. Hecht is not joining us today. He is out with COVID. So Dr. Del Rivero not only took a really late flight out and arrived last night, she is covering his talk in addition to her own. So one more fun fact about Dr. Del Rivero, who has become a good friend over the last year. We've actually done more than a dozen trips together in the last year to medical and scientific conferences. We've lost count. But a fun fact about her is that her favorite movie is Forrest Gump because she loves how Forrest is always persevering. And that is just, totally describes Dr. Del Rivero. Welcome, Dr. Del Rivero.
Well, thank you again for the kind introduction. I'm sorry that, hopefully you don't get sick of me at the end of my talks, but, and thank you again for having me here. So we're going to discuss about clinical trials. Okay, just like that. Okay, that sounds good. Thank you. And the first thing is that we need to understand what clinical trials are. Throughout the day, you have heard alpha clinical trial. You have heard a lot of Dr. Lee. They also discuss about some of the aspects of the clinical trials and how affect patients. But what are clinical trials? Clinical trials are research studies that test how well a new medical approaches or a new drug works on people. There are different type of clinical trials. Even a natural history study is a clinical trial. Not all clinical trials means that they need to give a drug, but that's because there are other different type of clinical trials like preventions and also, like I said earlier, natural history study. But also clinical trials and treatment trials also compare one drug with another drug that is already used to treat a specific disease. And the goal of these clinical trials is to determine whether a specific drug is effective, how that affects the disease itself, and also how it aligns with other therapies that we know, in this case, for neuroendocrine tumors. So there's different phases of clinical trials, and I don't know if any of you have participated in clinical trials, but also whenever you get information about the study, but you also get a consent. Usually, whenever we discuss about the clinical trials, we give a consent, and in that consent explained what is the objective of the study, what we want to do, but it also explained as well whether it is a phase 1 or phase 2. So let's discuss a little bit about what that means. So phase 1 of the study is to determine safety. Is the drug safe? What is the dose that the patient is able to tolerate? Is usually given in a small cohort of patients. Phase 2 of the clinical trials, once we know if the drug is safe, once we know what is the dose that we know the patients are able to tolerate, then we move to the phase 2 study. And the phase 2 study also helps me to determine and understand whether that drug could be effective in a specific disease. And because usually phase 1 is kind of like we call like a basket. There's different type of tumors, but phase 2 we usually dedicate it to a specific disease. Once we saw there is a signal in the phase 1, then in the phase 2 we're trying to understand, what is the efficacy of the drug for a specific disease as well. We're still continuing about safety. We're continuing about understanding what are the side effects as well of the drug. And then phase 3, once we know that a drug works for that specific disease or tumor, then the phase 3, it also helps me understand what if that drug in comparison with another drug that has been given for the same disease, whether one worked better than the other. I wanted to understand. Usually phase 3, we compare the study drug plus a standard of care, what we call the standard of care drugs of other drugs as well, to determine, which one may work better in this specific disease. And once, we understand that, then it's then approved by the FDA, by the Food Drug Administration, and then there's a phase 4 whether the patients are followed over long periods of time to then understand what could be the longer term side effects of a specific drug. Now, in terms of whenever we develop a clinical study or a clinical trial, And even on the consent, whenever you get to read that consent, it also explained there why we wanted to do this study. And it's usually what we call that primary objective of the study. The primary objective is the specific question that we want to answer with this specific study. Whether the question will be, well, I want to understand whether this drug is going to help stabilize the growth of tumor, whether it's going to shrink the tumor. So it's kind of like our most important question that we wanted to answer by this study. That's what we call the primary objective. And secondary objectives are all the relevant questions within the study. We wanted to also understand other questions that by doing the specific study, like if my primary endpoint or my most important question is to determine whether by giving X drug will the tumor shrink, then my secondary endpoint will be, okay, whether that drug will help stabilize the tumor, whether that could improve the quality of life. So there are other questions that we think may be pertinent for this study. So this is just an example. This is a study that we have available at the NIH. So this isn't Dr. Auerbach mentioned earlier about combination 177 lutein dotatate with olaparib. And just to kind of go over what the study is done. So as we know, Lutathera 177 lutein dotatate works for neuroendocrine tumors. We know it's approved for that. Most of the time stabilize the growth of tumors. We have seen some patients that we call exceptional responders that may respond quite well, but most of the time stabilize the growth of tumors within a periods of time. But knowing that they work, the study what we want to understand is like, could we make that they are more effective? Could we make shrink the tumors even more? And that's the reason why there is combination therapies, and one of them is olaparib. So olaparib is an oral medication that is approved for breast cancer, ovarian cancer, prostate cancer. And the reason why we wanted to combine olaparib with Lutathera is because Lutathera is a type of radiation that breaks the tumor's DNA. And what your body is going to try to do is trying to repair that damage. And by giving olaparib, what it's going to do is going to prevent that repair. And we think that that could make Lutathera more effective. So that's the question that we want to answer by doing this study. So since this combination has not been tested in humans, so this is the first time we wanted to understand the dose. So we have the phase 1. So we wanted to understand what is the best dose in order to then move to the phase 2. Right now, I can tell you there are 4 different doses. We're on our last dose, and we have not seen that many side effects with the combination. So we feel like with the dose, we can then move soon to the phase 2 study. And the primary question is for the phase 1 is like we wanted to understand the safety. That's our most primary question. And then the secondary question that we want to answer also is whether the combination could shrink the tumors. And those are the questions that we want to answer by doing this study. So there is important things that you need to know. So questions to ask your doctor about the clinical trial, and those are the questions that I feel they're important and relevant. And just to let you know, all these slides will be given to you. So the LACNAS is kind enough to provide the slides to you as well. But one of the questions about the trial is what is the purpose of the study? And one thing that I wanted to tell you, this is your right. You have the right to ask as many questions as you want to ask. And understand why this study is important, or why your doctor is recommended this study compared to other studies available as well. But the first thing is like, what is the purpose of the study? You can ask that question. Why would like to be part of this study? And then you can also ask why researchers think that this approach may be better than other ones used or other studies, and then understand as well and discuss what are the other possibilities as well. How long will I'll be in the study? What kind of tests are needed or involved in order to be a participant on the study? And also, it's important that you always get information whenever we enroll a patient in a clinical trial. There is also contact information, the research nurse or the patient care coordinator. It's important to obtain of all that information so that way you have availability to the people to ask any questions that you may have as well about the study. And also, sometimes some of the questions at the NIH is like, okay, are you in charge of my care or am I doctored locally? So it's kind of like the other question that I also get as well. And that's important to ask as well. And usually, whenever a patient is enrolled in a clinical study, the investigator responsible for that study is the one that oversees all of the care and, of course, collaborating with the physician as well. Questions about the risk and benefits. What you need to ask: what are the possible side effects or the risk about these new therapies? What are the possible benefits as well? So those are the different questions to ask the doctor about clinical trials. Like I say, question about your rights. How will my health information be kept private? What happens if I decide to leave the study? So you need to always understand as well your rights of the studies. Questions about costs. Different studies may have different ways to cover the cost. There are some of the studies that are sponsored by pharmaceutical companies and they're able to provide the drugs for free. Some of the pharmaceutical companies may be able to provide funding in order to do different imaging studies or tests and so forth. So I think it's important that you understand about what the cost may be involved most of the times, and a lot of these tests and scans and so forth may be covered by the insurance, and usually the drug is provided by a pharmaceutical company or even the hospital itself if they have a way to provide the drugs. Or sometimes if there is a drug that is already approved by the FDA for a different indication, the insurance should be able to cover for that as well. So there's different ways to understand the cost and how that will affect as well. And then also different questions about insurance company and how that gets involved. Questions about daily life, how this study will affect your day-to-day activities, how often you need to go to the hospital or get blood tests or scans, and how far do you need to travel. Some of these studies you may need to travel because there may be a study that you want to be participate, but they may be on the other sides of the states. I am at the NIH, and we do see patients coming from California to go and see me as well at the NIH, and what is that looks like, and how that's going to affect your day-to-day activity. So I think it's important also to understand and ask those questions as well. Tips to ask about your doctor about clinical trial, and that's very important. Always bring a family member. Sometimes when we go and see a doctor, there's so much information that is given at you, and sometimes I can understand it's sometimes difficult to retain all that information. So bring a family member. So write notes. One other thing that I ask I tell my patients is like whatever questions you may have, please write down those questions and a notebook. Always have that notebook with you, a piece of paper, because what happened, even that happened to me whenever I'm going to see the doctor, is like I have all these questions and then I forget to ask those questions. So it's important to always kind of like bring that information with you, and always don't ever hesitate to ask any questions to your doctors. Write them down as I discuss and as well as answer. So that way you have those available when needed. About the clinical trials at the NCI, this is my contact information. So we have studies at the clinical centers that are free of cost, just because we are federal funded, and there is a way that you can get treatment at the NIH, and also it's important that whoever participates at the clinical at the NIH is we make sure that we have a study, a treatment study or a natural history study that those studies could allow us to see patients at the clinical center. But that's in any other institution. I think it's important to understand what clinical trials each institution had. My understanding earlier today, Lisa was telling me that Dr. Lee has a lot of studies here in City of Hope available for neuroendocrine tumors. So just ask what the options are. This is for me, and this is the contact information. The reason why I like these slides is because no, I'm not promoting my institution, but I do feel like this website is very helpful to patients. So there is like a hotline that you can call, and they can give you guidance about you have a question about a specific tumor type, or you have a question about a specific drug. If you have a question is about a clinical trial, the NCI has information for a lot of the trials available within the whole United States. And I have not used it myself, but I know patients have used this and they find it very helpful too. They have like a live chat, and then you have an email that you can always email for any information. So I think this is tools that you may want to have if you ever have any questions about that. And with that, then I will move to my next topic, which is opportunities and to access Net Resources and Clinical Trials. I showed this slide earlier that and before 2000, there was not that many treatment options available for neuroendocrine tumors, but now we have quite a few treatment options, but also understanding the timing of each one of these drugs is something that even between net experts we need to understand, but it's always these different options that we need to understand when and how we need to provide those. But there's always the questions about, the challenges as I do research at the NIH, I do clinical trials at the NIH, but it's always when I start being involved in the neuroendocrine tumor care, I make me realize of the different challenges that patients suffer and having this diagnosis and the rarity of the disease. But we know one of the challenges of in the management of neuroendocrine tumors is like we discussed. I mean, there are some FDA-approved agents, but also when and what combination and when to use it. That's still some of the questions that we want to answer. And of course, what is the sequencing? Maybe I would recommend one therapy, and maybe somebody else may recommend another therapy. And name it doesn't mean that one is wrong and the other one is right. It's just that we just may have different approaches to therapies. I like to consider surgery for my patients, maybe others not necessarily, but it's kind of like the way they practice in each institution that can also vary as how we can to make certain recommendations. But that said, please always, ask the questions, whatever, because one of the things I always tell my patients is whatever decisions you make, I want you to feel comfortable with that decision. And it's okay to go for a second, third, or fourth opinion if that's what is needed for you to make the decision that you feel more comfortable with. Patients with neuroendocrine tumors and their families also face unique challenges. It takes a long time to diagnosis, and sometimes the cancer is identified in advanced stages. Most medical centers has limited experience, and patients often has to search for experts, and sometimes they need to travel outside the home region, and that comes with a lot of cost as well. There is no standardized treatment guidance, and that creates uncertainty and search for answers, and patients feel isolated. On the other hand, net researchers also face difficulties because being there is considering this is a rare cancer, it may take a long time to accrue patients. There are multidisciplinary care is needed for patients living with neuroendocrine tumors. One thing that I want to mention is that, and I feel proud of that, is that we just published the guidelines through the American Society of Clinical Oncology, which is kind of like the biggest oncological meeting for us. And that guidelines, it was really something that we trying to tell ASCO, like this is important because that can also provide guidance to physicians in the communities. And we felt that that was needed. So hopefully with that, we can provide some light to physicians in the communities as well to be able to treat those patients with neuroendocrine tumors. And another thing that the researchers also face difficulties is about there is not enough preclinical models for neuroendocrine tumors. And I just want to say, NERRF, we have some representation from the Neuroendocrine Tumor Research Foundations. That's one of the things that they wanted to also fund as part of the program, to be able to fund to develop preclinical models, because those are needed in order to test drugs. If we have more models, we can test more drugs, and then we can develop other studies for neuroendocrine tumors. Natural history studies are important. So as I mentioned earlier, this is also a clinical trial, natural history study. This is something that I learned also when I was at the clinical center that will help me understand about the biology of these tumors. And by understanding that, being rare, that could hopefully give me information about how to treat this cancer. So I'm fortunate to be the investigator of this natural history study. If I may say, a couple of people here are part of the study that allows me to follow these patients over long periods of time, because I wanted to understand what is the clinical characteristics, if there is any growth, in which cases it grows, whether if they respond to therapies, because we have seen that different patients may respond different to different therapies. And I wanted to understand why that is happening. So that way it can help me understand whether we can develop a more personalized therapy for patients with neuroendocrine tumors. The way patients can be enrolled on the clinical studies, either the patient itself or the referring physician to provide all the information to us. We review, and based on that information, we can then provide what studies is available, not only in the clinical center, but also outside the clinical center. I sometimes refer patients to different institutions within the United States, as long as it's closer to you. Because I understand that sometimes traveling might be difficult for some patients, but if I with this information, it always gives me, the knowledge to say, okay, maybe there is a different study that may be closer to you as well. And the thing about the NET community is like we know each other, so we are a very tight community as patients and physicians, and I think that's something that always you need to keep in consideration as well. I do want to say that based on this natural history study, that helped us a lot. I've been the PI of this study now for 5 years, and it changed a little bit in the last 2 years for a more specific study for neuroendocrine tumors because it used to be a study for rare tumors. But based on the information that we acquired, now we have a specific study for neuroendocrine tumors as well. We include all neuroendocrine tumors or all sites as well as all grades as well. And if the patient comes to the clinical center and we do surgery, we collect a small piece of tissue, and there's different questions that we want to answer with that. One of the questions, or one of the things that I'm doing with the tumor, is that we send the tumor for genomic analysis, and I would like to understand whether that information could help me to understand later if there is any signal of response to therapy or specific response to specific therapy, or if there is anything that could help guide me and say like, well, if you have that specific protein in the gene, maybe your tumors may grow more rapidly, for which maybe we need to do something earlier. So that's one of the questions that we want to answer. I would like to answer by doing the study. We also doing models organoids, and with those organoids we test tumors. And I have to say, we just opened a first in human study by doing this model. And I will tell you a little bit about that. This is the study that we have available at the NIH of combination therapy. We actually, I don't think we will be able to finish sooner than 2026 because we already kind of like got the fourth dose, and then after that we will move to the phase 2 study. I think by 2025, that's when we hope that we can finish the study and get some information about the combination study. But this is something that I would like to mention. Yeah, this is a first in human study that we just opened. So this is a study, a drug that targets a specific protein within the tumors. This is called the LP1. So just to let you know, you even have to look at it because the LP1 stands for delta-like non-canonical protein ligand. So just forget what I said. Even me, I have to look into that. Yes, but basically what it is that this protein can be found in cancer cells. It may be normal in the fetal development, but then once it goes away, but then once patients acquire mutations over time and the patients acquire a type of cancer, this protein can be expressed. And what we know is that it's expressed variable in various types of neuroendocrine tumors, from the well-differentiated neuroendocrine tumors as well for the more aggressive neuroendocrine carcinomas as well, and other tumors as well, like pheochromocytomas and paraganglioma. So that's something that we found as well. We did further analysis, and this is a little cartoon, but the only thing that you need to take from this cartoon is that also what was learned is that this protein can also be responsible for neuroendocrine differentiation as well. And that's kind of whether the question arises whether, that's something that we could, understand more about whether this can be targeted. And then we did experiments in the lab based on the information that we learned from participants as well, based on the surgeries that has been done. We tried this drug in different tumor types and organoids, and we also saw that this drug it kills all tumor cells. And that's I want you to focus on the green line, because that green is that when the drug is given, it kills all tumor cells. Again, this is what we have seen. We still need to translate in humans and see. Sometimes we don't see the same effect, but that's the reason why we do these studies as well. And that's why we have this first in human study it's called ADCT 701 that will include patients with all neuroendocrine tumors, carcinomas, and other adrenal tumors as well. This is a very busy slide, and this is the most of the ongoing studies for well-differentiated neuroendocrine tumors, and we have various. Dr. Auerbach discussed very nicely the different type of combinations studies with Lutathera and olaparib or triapine. There's different type of combinations with Lutathera as well. We have a adjuvant, and I do think this is a very important study. This is led by Dr. Suarez, and she would like to answer whether by giving chemotherapy after surgery in a patient with pancreas neuroendocrine tumors, that is considered a high risk, meaning that they have maybe a few lymph node metastases, lymph node involvement, or some liver lesions is seen as well. Whether adding capecitabine temozolomide right after surgery, we call that adjuvant, could that help as well to decrease any recurrence? And that's the question that Dr. Suarez would like to ask. Dr. Auerbach also discussed about the alpha PRT. So that's an ongoing study. The results has been promising, but again, something that we need to understand also the long-term adverse events as well of these neuroendocrine tumors. So as we can see, this is just a picture of the different type of clinical trials for neuroendocrine tumors, whether it's pancreas, whether it's GI in pancreas, or only gastrointestinal neuroendocrine tumors, and this is information that will be available to you as well. I would like to mention we also have a study for pheochromocytomas and paragangliomas. This is an NCI study, NCI sponsored study. And with that, I would like to mention that the NCI also have different sponsored studies for neuroendocrine tumors, for different types, gastroenteropancreatic neuroendocrine tumors. We have for pancreas, GI, for bronchial neuroendocrine tumors, with also Lutathera versus everolimus. So these investigators will try to understand whether if you give patients with either Lutathera or patients with everolimus, they wanted to understand, which one would be better in patients with bronchial neuroendocrine tumors. They're also studying for the most aggressive neuroendocrine carcinomas and different various chemotherapy options as well. There's a study of FIOPARA that I'm also fortunate to lead with Dr. Perez as well from Dana-Farber. So we can see there is different studies available for neuroendocrine tumors, but you also need to discuss with your primary care physician which of these studies will be the best for you, what the options are out there. And like I said earlier, in terms of clinical studies, please always ask questions to the physician. I would like to end this with this slide. This is our neuroendocrine tumor program at the clinical center that we cover translational and clinical efforts as well, with a natural history study, and be able to collect tissue from surgery and to understand more about the biology of these neuroendocrine tumors. And this is only me. I mean, Dr. Lee has many other studies, Dr. Auerbach. I mean, there you can see that there is a lot of people working for this, for develop better therapies for neuroendocrine tumors. I'm also going to open a new study for neuroendocrine carcinomas with chemotherapy as well. So as you can see, there is a lot of work going. This is a very exciting time and hopeful time for for patients with neuroendocrine tumors, because we can see there's quite a few investigators, not just me, who really are passionate and focused and develop better therapies for neuroendocrine tumors. And with that, I would like to conclude this. I would like to acknowledge all the people. This takes a village. It's not only me. There's a lot of people involved here. And I like this sentence because I think this is give me hope as well. Cancer cannot cripple love. It cannot shatter hope. It cannot conquer the spirit. And with that, I would like to thank you.